The throne room of Valyrian shook as the ancient war horns screamed across the crystal towers. Alien warriors rushed through the golden halls with blades in hand, faces painted for battle. Above them, the sky cracked open with enemy fire raining. Down from orbit, the Empress of Zarelian sat still in her sacred chamber, one hand resting on the armrest beside the glowing weapon no warrior had ever lifted. The weapon was more than a sword. It was alive with power, humming with heat and light. Forged in the heart of their twin suns, the sacred weapon could only be wielded by the true champion chosen by the old spirits. For 7 generations, the weapon had waited. Strong generals, royal guards, and champions had tried. None had moved it even an inch. Now the capital burned. The enemy, a brutal hybrid force known only as the Scorchburn, had breached the outer cities. Flames rose from the horizon. The Zarelian army was breaking. The Empress knew the end was near. And yet, she refused to flee. She would not leave her throne or the sacred blade behind. A blast shattered the eastern gate. Smoke rushed in like a beast unchained. The guards drew their weapons, but were flung aside like broken toys. Through the smoke, a figure walked. Not tall, not glowing, not one of their own. A human male covered in dust, wearing cracked armor. And a blood-streaked face stepped into the throne room. The alien guards screamed in warning. The Empress stood, pointing at the intruder, but he did not raise a weapon. Instead, he looked at the sword. The sacred weapon pulsed once, like it. Recognized him. Then, without fear, the human walked straight to it. The room fell into stunned silence. The guards hesitated, unsure if they should strike or run. The Empress narrowed her eyes. She watched the human reach for the blade. He shouldn't be able to. It would burn him, curse him, or worse. But his fingers wrapped around the hilt. And then slowly and smoothly he lifted it. No pain. No scream, no explosion. The weapon glowed brighter than ever, casting golden light across the room. The human held it in one hand like it weighed nothing. The weapon that no alien warrior had moved in centuries now danced effortlessly in a stranger's grip. The Empress took a slow breath, stunned. This wasn't just a human. This was something else. Someone called by forces older than her empire. The guards dropped their weapons in disbelief. The Empress stepped down from her throne, her voice shaky but firm. As she asked a question she never thought she would ask a human, "Who are you?" She whispered, eyes locked on the glowing blade in his hand. The human looked up, his expression calm but haunted. "Someone who's tired of war," he said. But the blade in his hand burned with purpose, and the Empress knew this was only the beginning. Outside, the city screamed. The enemy was getting closer. The sacred weapon had chosen its bearer, but the war was far from over. And now, the Zarelian Empire's last hope wasn't alien, wasn't divine, wasn't of royal blood. He was human, and he had arrived when all others failed. The Empress gave a short nod. For now she would not question the will of the blade. She would not fight the one it had chosen. If he could save her people, then so be it. The war had turned, and the galaxy would remember the day a human lifted the unliftable. Asterisk. The sacred weapon glowed even brighter as the human turned to face the guards. They stepped back, their instincts battling confusion. No human should have survived the outer gates. No outsider should have passed the firewalls. And yet he stood there, weapon in hand, as if born to it. The Empress descended the final steps of her throne. Her long golden robes dragged across the floor, but her eyes were locked on the blade. It was not just tradition. It was a symbol of power, divine selection, and the right to lead armies. Now that power was in the hands of a man no one knew. He didn't bow. He didn't boast. He simply looked at her, waiting for something. She felt exposed under that stare, not weak, but uncertain. For all her years on the throne, no moment had shaken her quite like this. A foreigner had done what no Zerelian had managed for centuries. A general burst into the room, bleeding from a wound across his chest. "Your Majesty, the central ring is lost," he cried. "The enemy's siege beasts are advancing. We have maybe 20 minutes before the inner sanctum falls." His eyes widened when he saw the human and the lifted blade. The Empress raised one hand, silencing the general. She walked closer to the stranger. "You lifted the weapon of Rixen," she said. "Do you even know what that means?" The human tilted his head slightly, then answered, "I know it wanted to be lifted. I just listened to it. It was madness." And yet the weapon pulsed gently in agreement. The Empress's lips parted, but no words came. All training, all law, all prophecy pointed to one truth: whoever wielded the blade must lead. But he wasn't of her kind. He wasn't of her blood. He wasn't even of her world. "I'm not here to steal your throne," the human said quietly. "I'm here because something brought me. I didn't ask for it. But I won't run from it either." The way he spoke made her heart twist with something unfamiliar. Trust was not something she gave easily. Yet she found herself listening. Loud explosion rocked the walls. Dust rained from the ceiling. The general shouted orders, but panic had already taken root. The royal guard scattered to their posts. The Empress turned to her advisors, but they looked to her for direction. She realized they no longer looked only at her. Their eyes also flickered toward the human. In that moment, she knew the old way had shattered. The galaxy didn't care about bloodlines anymore. The enemy didn't care about royal decrees. Only strength mattered now. And this human had lifted what none could. That made him more than a man. It made him necessary. "Come with me," she said at last. She walked down the corridor that led beneath the palace. He followed without hesitation. Each step echoed against walls covered in stories of past warriors. Stories of those who failed to lift the blade. Now those walls felt like lies. Torches flickered as they entered a war chamber lined with maps and energy feeds. Holographic models showed the city burning. Beast units crushed defense towers. A blinking red line showed the enemy path growing. Closer, the Empress tapped a point near the core temple. "They'll reach this in minutes. If they destroy the heart core, the Empire ends." The human stepped forward. "Show me what's guarding that temple." A nearby commander blinked, in surprise but obeyed. A new map formed, revealing a fortress half collapsed, with 3 access routes blocked by rubble. Only one remained open, but it was swarming with scorchburn elite hunters. The human studied it in silence. Then he nodded. "I'll go through that route, alone if I must." The blade wasn't meant to sit on the throne. It was meant to burn through. "Monsters." The Empress caught her breath. "You won't survive alone," she warned. "You'll be torn apart before you reach the gate. Then send your best to follow," he said, gripping the sacred weapon tighter. "But I go first." The blade woke up for a reason. "I won't let that reason die here." His voice held no arrogance, only certainty. It silenced the room more effectively than any royal command could have. The Empress stared at him for a long moment. Then for the first time in years, she extended her hand not as a ruler, but as an equal. "Then we ride," she said. "Let the stars judge us both by our fire." And for the first time, human and alien left the palace as one force. The war horns screamed again as the palace gates opened and the Empress stepped outside. She was wrapped in ceremonial armor, her royal crest glowing at the chest. Behind her marched the finest warriors of Zerelia. Their armor was blackened from battle, but their eyes were sharp and fixed forward. Beside her walked the human stranger. His body bore scars of old wars, but none from this planet. And yet he moved like he belonged in this fight. He carried the sacred blade over his shoulder, glowing with fierce light. The weapon pulsed with each step he took. The gathered soldiers stared at him in silence. Some bowed slightly. Others looked away, confused or proud or afraid. None spoke against him. The Empress raised her hand and signaled forward. The army began to march toward the hardcore temple. The final battle had begun. They passed broken towers and dead mechs rusting in the street. Fires still burned in the upper districts. Zarelian civilians watched from doorways, clutching loved ones. Children pointed at the glowing weapon. Elders whispered old stories. They had waited lifetimes to see this blade lifted again. A scout flew in on a battered hover bike. He stopped near the Empress, removing his cracked helmet. The Scorchburn are already at the temple walls. They brought a siege beast. It's not like the others. It's bigger, faster, smarter. His voice trembled with urgency. The human. Step forward, show me. The scout uploaded the data to a portable display. A live feed showed the beast, a towering creature of molten armor and sharp limbs. Its roar broke stone walls. It smashed tanks with ease. Around it, Scorchburn hunters protected its path. The Empress studied the image. If it breaks through the temple's final gate, the heart core will collapse. The human nodded. Then I stop it there. The general riding behind them shouted, "You can't go alone. Let us flank the beast. Surround it from both sides." The human paused. "You'll flank, but don't engage until I draw it out." The Empress gave the order. The formation split into 3 groups. The main force circled wide. The scout guided the human down a narrow canyon path that would lead him directly to the temple wall. The canyon walls were tall and silent. Shadows moved above them. The human kept his eyes forward. The sacred weapon hummed gently in his grip. It did not resist. It did not grow heavy. It felt like an extension of his own arm. Like it belonged there. He reached the end of the canyon and climbed onto the broken platform overlooking the temple. The heart core pulsed beneath the stone floor. Its energy formed a shield that cracked with each impact from the siege beast's fists. The enemy had minutes left before breaking through. The human walked onto the battlefield without a word. The Scorchburn turned and saw him. They laughed. Then they charged, 10 warriors at once. He moved like water. The sacred blade sang through the air. One by one, the enemies fell without a scream. The siege beast turned its attention to him. Its body twisted with fire and metal. Its eyes glowed like suns. It roared and charged, shaking the ground with each step. The human stood still. When it came close, he leapt into the air and drove the blade straight into its armor. The beast howled. Flames erupted from its back. It tried to shake him off, but he held on. He twisted the blade. A crack formed along its spine. The Empress watched from above, unable to look away. Her heart raced. No warrior had ever survived touching such a creature. The human jumped off as the beast turned, then rolled to the ground. He dashed under its limbs and sliced through its leg joints. Sparks exploded with each strike. He didn't stop moving. The weapon cut deeper than any known tech. It wasn't just steel. It was judgment. With a final scream, the beast collapsed to its knees. The human climbed its back once more and stabbed into its head. A burst of golden energy blasted outward, knocking hunters off their feet. The siege beast crashed to the ground, motionless and defeated. The battlefield froze. The Scorchburn stared in disbelief. Then they began to retreat. Some dropped their weapons. Others fled in ships. The Empress raised her hand, signaling the retreat should not be followed. Let them run. Let them carry stories of what they saw. She descended the hill and approached the human, who now knelt beside the temple steps. His hands were dirty. His breath was heavy, but the blade still glowed, warm and alive. She stood before him and offered her hand. "The galaxy will never forget what you did today," she said softly. The temple steps were lined with glowing crystals, once used to test the worthiness of those who dared to lift the sacred blade. Now they shimmered faintly as the human walked past, carrying the weapon like it was part of him. The Empress walked beside him in silence, eyes watching every movement. Inside the temple, the heart core pulsed with deep blue light. The chamber was round, lined with ancient symbols that told the story of the first flame. Only the royal bloodline and the chosen one were allowed to approach. Yet no one stopped the human as he stepped forward. The energy of the core responded. To him, the light bent gently in his direction. The Empress watched in awe. The ancient prophecies had spoken of a warrior who would come from beyond the stars, one who could awaken the weapon and restore the balance of power. She reached out and touched the stone wall. The symbol of her ancestors glowed beneath her fingers. Her voice was steady but filled with feeling. You were not born of us, yet the temple sees you. It welcomes you. That means something more than war or politics. The human said nothing. He simply stared at the core. The weapon in his hand began to hum. For a moment, the air shimmered. The entire chamber seemed to breathe. Then he turned to her and spoke. This power isn't mine. It belongs to your world. I only answered its call. Outside, the warriors celebrated, but the Empress knew this moment was larger than a single battle. The council would demand answers. The priesthood would question the purity of the act. Many would resist the idea that a human had done what none of their kind ever could. Still, she had seen it with her own eyes. She had seen him move with grace, strike with purpose, and risk his life without asking for a reward. He hadn't come for gold or fame. He had come because he felt something pulling him here, and that made her wonder why the two of them exited the temple and stood on the highest platform. Below them, the city smoked but still lived. Crowds gathered and looked up. The people cheered. Not just for survival. They cheered because the sacred weapon had risen again. Hope had returned to Zorelia. Later that night, the Empress held a quiet meeting with her closest advisors. The human sat across from them, silent as always. The High Commander leaned forward and spoke. We have secured the city, but the enemy fleet still surrounds the planet. If they regroup, we are finished. Another advisor added, the sacred weapon has returned, yes, but we still lack a fleet strong enough to break the blockade. If we don't act fast, this victory will be meaningless. The Scorchburn are brutal. They will burn everything until nothing remains. The Empress looked at the human. Can you fight in the stars? She asked. He gave a single nod. I've piloted more ships than I can count. But I'll need something fast. Something with teeth. And I'll need volunteers who can handle deep space combat. The High Commander raised an eyebrow. You'll have them, he said. The Flameburn Squad owes their lives to you. They'll follow you without question. Just tell us where to strike. The human glanced down at a holomap of the enemy fleet's layout and traced a line through the middle. There's a weakness here, he said. Their dreadnoughts rotate position every 6 hours. But this gap right here stays vulnerable for a full 7 minutes. That's where we break through. Not with force, with speed. We fly straight into the gap and hit their core. The room fell silent. It was a suicide run, but it made sense. The Emperor stood slowly and said, prepare the fleet. Begin evacuation of the outer colonies. If we fail, at least some of our people will survive. But I believe we won't fail. Not with him. As the meeting ended, the Empress stopped the human at the door. You move like someone carrying sorrow. What is it you've lost? She asked softly. He didn't answer right away. Then he looked into her eyes and said, a home that never accepted me. A war that never ended. She placed her hand gently on his arm. Then let us give you something worth fighting for. Not as a tool, not as a weapon, but as someone who matters. He nodded once, no words followed. But in that moment, something between them changed. That night, the stars above Zorelia lit with new movement. The first wave of ships began launch. Preparations. Engineers worked around the clock. The people knew something was coming. And at the center of it all stood the human with the sacred blade, preparing for a war no one believed they could win. The launch deck roared with sound as fighter ships powered up one by one. Xerelian pilots rushed to their stations. Technicians yelled over comms while energy coils pulsed through docking rails. The air smelled like heat and ozone. It was the scent of war returning to the stars. The humans stood at the edge of the command platform, watching the Flameburn squad prepare their ships. Each craft was slender and sharp, painted in royal silver and red. The Empress had kept her word. She gave him Xerelia's fastest hunters and its most loyal warriors. He wore new armor now, gifted by the royal armorer. It wasn't flashy or heavy. It was designed for speed and flexibility. On his back, the sacred blade rested in a magnetic sheath, still glowing softly. The weapon had not dimmed since the moment he touched it. The Empress approached him. She carried her helm under one arm and spoke without formality. "I told the people you would lead us to the stars. Don't make me a liar." He gave a small smile. "I'll bring them something they haven't seen in a long time." Fear in the eyes of the enemy. She nodded, then stepped back as the sirens echoed across the bay. Pilots raced to their seats. The countdown began. The fleet launched in 3 waves. The first wave would open the corridor. The second would clear the path. The third would deliver the strike. As the human's fighter lifted off, his hands moved over the controls with expert memory. It had been years since he'd flown a craft this sharp. Yet his grip was steady, his heart didn't race. His mind was already focused on the breach point ahead. The Flameburn squad moved in tight formation. Their voices crackled in his headset, calling him Strykar, a name once used for their greatest champions. He didn't correct them. If it gave them courage, he would wear the name until his last breath. The enemy fleet loomed in orbit like a wall of metal and fire. Massive dreadnoughts floated like gods of war, each bristling with weapons. The Scorchburn fleet had no weakness in its heart, only along its edge. That was where the plan would live or die. As they approached the outer ring, anti-ship cannons roared to life. Blue fire lit up the void. One Xerelian craft burst into flame and spiraled out of formation. The pilot ejected just in time. The rest tightened their flight lines and followed the human into the breach. He banked hard and spun under a destroyer, weaving between shockwaves. He could feel the sacred blade vibrating behind him, like it knew what was coming. It wasn't just a relic. It was aware. It responded to danger. And it was ready. The breach appeared ahead, a narrow corridor between 2 rotating dreadnoughts. The timing had to be perfect. Too soon, and they'd be crushed. Too late, and the gate would seal. He gave the signal. The entire squad dropped, low and accelerated with everything they had. They hit the corridor like a storm. Lasers streaked past them. Hulls groaned under pressure. One fighter clipped the wall and spun into darkness. The rest pushed forward. Inside the corridor, every second stretched into eternity. Then, finally, they burst out the other side. The Scorchburn Central Command ship came into view. It was massive, plated in black stone and energy steel, a fortress in space. It pulsed, with dark red veins that carried power to every weapon system. The human aimed directly at its core reactor, target the heart. "Full payload, no hesitation," he ordered. The squad obeyed. Dozens of missiles locked on. The enemy ships scrambled to intercept, but they were seconds too slow. The weapons hit the command ship's core. The explosion tore it apart from within. Flames bloomed in space. The shockwave threw nearby ships off course. Debris rained across the sector. The Scorchburn fleet broke formation. Some vessels fled. Others drifted, powerless. The wall that had held Xerelia hostage was gone in a single blow. The human ship spun once before stabilizing. Damage reports flashed across his screen. His right wing was torn. Fuel levels were dropping. but he was alive. The squad cheered through the cums. The impossible had been done. The blockade had been shattered. Back on Zerelia, the people watched it happen through orbital feeds. Children screamed in joy. Elders dropped to their knees in thanks. The Empress stared at the screen in silence, her hands trembling. She whispered, one word beneath her breath. Victory. As the fleet returned home, rescue ships were sent to collect survivors. The human landed last. He stepped out onto the cracked stone of the capital's central square, where the people gathered and parted to let him through. They no longer saw a stranger. They saw salvation. The crowd in the capital square fell silent as the human walked forward. Dust and soot covered his face, but the sacred weapon on his back still glowed with quiet power. Alien children stared at him with wide eyes. Warriors bowed their heads in respect. No one stopped him. The Empress stepped down from her observation platform. Her golden armor still shone, though her expression was unreadable. She approached him slowly, not as a ruler but as someone humbled by fate. The crowd opened a path between them, and all eyes remained locked on the moment. You did what none of us could, she said quietly. You broke the blockade. You led our finest into fire and brought them back. The human nodded once. He didn't speak. His silence carried more weight than any words. The sacred blade pulsed once on his back like it agreed. The High Council gathered behind the Empress, their faces filled with unease. Old traditions had been broken. Ancient laws had been challenged. A human now stood at the center of their survival. The chief elder stepped forward, his voice slow and heavy. The sacred weapon responds to him, yes. But we must ask, what does that mean for our people? Will we surrender our ways? Will we place our fate in the hands of one not born of our soil? The crowd shifted, unsure whether to cheer or worry. The Empress raised her hand. We will not forget who we are. But we will also not ignore the truth. The blade chose him. The war obeyed him. The stars opened for him. If we are to survive what comes next, we must walk beside him, not behind. A hush fell over the council. None argued. Not because they feared her, but because deep down, they knew she was right. The Scorchburn had fled, but the galaxy was far from safe. Rumors had already begun to spread. Whispers of a new threat moving through the outer sectors. That night, as the city rested, the Empress invited the human to the Royal Observatory. It was quiet there, with the stars shining above through a glass ceiling. She walked with him past ancient star charts and maps that marked old conquests and forgotten disasters. You came here a stranger, she said. But now you're something else. My people speak your name as if it's a prayer. I don't know if that's fair to you. He looked at the stars and answered calmly. It's not about fair. It's about doing what needs to be done. She turned to face him. Do you plan to leave? He didn't reply immediately. Then he said, I was never meant to stay in one place. But this world, this place, it feels different. Like it remembers me somehow. Like the blade didn't just call me. It knew me. The Empress took a step closer. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Then stay, not for the war, not for the crown, but for something more. Stay for what we might build, together. The human looked into her eyes. There was no command in her words. Only hope. Suddenly, the chamber doors burst open. A royal messenger ran in, breathless and pale. Your Majesty, forgive the intrusion, but a transmission was just intercepted. A signal from deep space. It bears the Scorchburn seal, but it carries a new symbol. One we've never seen before. The Empress turned sharply. Play it. A holographic feed appeared. Static broke through, followed by a deep mechanical voice. To the survivors of Zerelia, you have drawn the blade. You have awakened what should have slept forever. Prepare your kind. We are coming. The signal cut out. Silence returned to the room. The stars above seemed colder now. The Empress stared at the space where the image had vanished. The human walked forward and touched the edge of the console. His jaw tightened. They're not retreating. They were waiting. He turned to her. That voice, it wasn't just Scorchburn. Something else is behind them, something older. The blade didn't wake for a simple invasion. It woke for a storm that hasn't hit yet. She nodded slowly. Then we must be ready. The next war will not wait. As dawn approached, the city lights dimmed and the stars remained. The human stood alone on the temple balcony. The sacred weapon now rested beside him, quiet but aware. In the distance, ships were being repaired and banners were being raised. A new chapter had begun. The temple bells rang across the capital as the Empress summoned her war council. The signal they had received was not just a threat, it was a declaration. Something ancient was coming, something even the Scorchburn seemed to obey. No one knew its name, but all felt its weight. The human stood at the center of the chamber. The sacred weapon remained at his back, glowing brighter now than before. The blade responded to the tension in the air, pulsing like a heartbeat. He watched each map as they projected across the walls, eyes sharp and silent. Scouts had been sent to investigate the outer systems. One returned, shaking and wounded. It wasn't a fleet, he said. It was a presence. Like the stars themselves. Shifted when it passed. Entire moons were cracked open. No trace of survivors. Only silence. The council fell into stunned silence. The Empress clenched her fists at her side. Then we face something beyond what we've known. This is not a war of borders. It is a war of survival. She looked to the human. What do you see when you hear that voice? He took a slow breath before answering. I've fought monsters, machines, tyrants, but that voice wasn't made for ears. It was made to be obeyed. It came from something that wants no victory. Only endings. His voice didn't shake. But everyone in the room felt colder. The engineers reported that the fleet was not yet ready for full deployment. Repairs were slow. Resources stretched thin. The outer colonies had begun evacuations, but time was against them. Every report brought darker news. The stars were turning red across 5 sectors, and still, the sacred weapon grew warmer in the human's hands. At night, it would sing faintly, a hum that carried through the walls of his quarters. He could feel it guiding him in dreams. He saw flashes of burned skies and oceans filled with ash. And something rising from beneath, the Empress. Noticed the change in him. He no longer wandered the palace freely. He stayed close to the temple. He trained longer each day. She watched from a distance, wondering how much of him was still human and how much had become something else entirely. One evening, she approached him beneath the twin moons. The sacred blade rested beside him as he sat in silence. You're pulling away, she said gently. He nodded but did not look up. The weapon is showing me things. Things that haven't happened yet. But they will. She sat beside him without speaking for a moment. Then she said, prophecy is part of our bloodline. But even we never saw this coming. I believe the blade chose you not just to fight, but to warn us. He turned to her at last. Then we better start listening. The next day, the enemy returned. Not as a fleet, but as a shadow. A massive structure drifted into orbit above a dead moon near the border. It was not metal. It was bone and void, shaped like a predator with wings that blocked the stars. The skies turned black across 3 systems. Signals failed. Comms dropped. Even light refused to reflect off its surface. Zarelian astronomers tried to map its shape, but the readings broke every machine. The Empress stood in the war tower, eyes locked on the projection. What is that? She whispered. The human walked in slowly. It's not a ship, it's a warning. It wants us to see it before it kills us. He placed his hand on the blade. It pulsed like it recognized the shape. This thing is old. Older than your empires. older than Earth, maybe older than time itself. The council fell quiet again. Then one of the youngest officers stepped forward. If it's alive, it can be fought. If it's a god, it can bleed. You proved that already. His voice cracked slightly, but the human nodded. You're right, we don't run. We stand. Preparations began once more. Ancient codes were unlocked. The Empress granted full access to every relic, every archive. The human began searching for forgotten tech, lost energy signatures, and places where the blade reacted strongest. The galaxy had secrets it no longer remembered, and in the heart of the temple, something changed. The blade whispered a name none could understand. It wasn't Cerulean, it wasn't human. It was something between. The human wrote it on the wall with his hand glowing, the letters burning like fire in the stone. The Empress stared at it. Is that their name? She asked. No, he replied. It's ours. It's what we must become to win. And as the suns rose the next morning, the people of Zerelia began to prepare for the final storm with a new fire in their hearts. Asterisk. The sky above. Zerelia turned crimson as the ancient entity drew closer. From the capital tower, the Empress watched the stars vanish behind its massive form. The structure was not just a weapon. It was alive. It fed on fear. It moved without engines. It moved by will alone. Across the planet, people stood still looking. Up, the sacred blade pulsed brighter than ever before. In the temple, the human stood with both hands wrapped around its hilt. He was not just a warrior anymore. He had become something greater. The weapon had changed him. His skin glowed faintly. At the edges, his veins carried strands of light. His voice echoed when he spoke, and his thoughts reached others before his lips moved. He was part of the blade now. The old spirits had chosen him fully. He was no longer just from Earth. The Empress entered the temple and stood at the base of the stairs. The people wait, she said. They need more than a blade. They need a symbol. He nodded slowly, stepping forward. Then we give them one. One they'll remember long after we're gone. Outside, the army had assembled. Zerelian soldiers, human volunteers, old machines, temple priests, and royal pilots stood together as one force. Ships hovered above, ready to break orbit. The final command came from a voice that was both human and not. It came from him. As the fleet launched, the human and Empress led the charge. Their ship, once a royal transport, had been remade. Powered by the blade's energy, it moved like lightning through space. No shields cracked under pressure. No hull shook. It was untouchable in the storm. The ancient entity began to respond. From its body, tendrils of black energy spread like roots. They pierced asteroids, shattered moons, and reached toward the incoming fleet. One Zerelian cruiser was caught and crumbled instantly. The rest dodged with all they had. The human stood at the bow of the ship, blade glowing in both hands. He leapt through the gravity field, launching himself across space with unnatural force. The Empress followed, using sacred armor to shield herself as they breached the outer skin of the creature. Inside was worse than expected. There were no walls. Only layers of memory, of war, of pain. Screams from ancient worlds echoed without. Sound. The creature had absorbed civilizations before Zerelia was born. It carried death not as a threat, but as its nature. The blade guided the human forward. It cut through illusions and broke through living shadows. The Empress moved beside him, her armor burning with the fire of her ancestors. Together, they reached the core of the beast. It was not a heart. It was a mirror. Inside that mirror, the human saw himself. Not as he was, but as he could become. Cold, unfeeling, a tool of war. The blade began to flicker, unsure. The Empress grabbed his hand and spoke. You are not a weapon. You are what makes weapons choose peace. He looked into her eyes and remembered Earth. He remembered pain, but he also remembered kindness. He gripped the blade tighter, and its light returned. Together, they stabbed the core. The mirror shattered, and the entity screamed for the first time in its life. From orbit, the fleet saw the shape begin to twist. Pieces broke off and burned. The tendrils withdrew. Space itself bent backward as the creature collapsed into itself. The sky cleared, and stars returned. The enemy had been undone by will, not just power. The human and the Empress returned, landing at the temple steps. The people fell to their knees. The council bowed in silence. No songs were sung, but in the silence, a deeper respect grew. Something had ended, but something greater had begun. In the weeks that followed, Zorelia changed. The borders opened. Trade resumed. Peace talks extended beyond old rivals. And in the center of it all stood a blade, now resting in crystal, no longer glowing. Waiting for the next to be worthy, the Empress ruled with strength, but never alone. By her side, the human remained, not as king, not as god, but as guardian. He trained the next generation, shared the truth behind war, and taught that power means nothing without purpose. He never sought reward. He never asked for titles, and though the stars offered him thrones and riches, he chose Zorelia, not for the blade, but for what it had become. A home. A place where peace was possible. A place that remembered who saved it. And in time, when the sacred blade glowed once more for the next warrior, the story of the human who lifted it first became legend. Not just in Zorelia, but in every corner of the galaxy that remembered the day hope was reborn in human hands.